So thank you, Ahmed, for this glorious introduction. Good morning, friends and colleagues. I'm an old hand here, right? So every time I come and stand before you, I'd like to say something new. And it's been getting difficult, more difficult as time goes by. It's been 20-some years since we started with I started with the ERF, and I hope to continue for at least another 20 years. So with that in mind, I will attend to the topic at hand, which is actually the hope, stagnation, and setbacks. And Catherine did a great job, actually, setting up the stage for my talk. So let me, So what do we know, right? In a nutshell, this is exactly what she just said, and I promise you I did not coordinate with her, right? I mean, I prepared my presentation last night. This is why I missed your dancing party, right? So you have to give me some sympathy here, and then payback comes later, right? I mean, I stayed in my room doing this whilst you guys were having good times somewhere in a nice place, I'm told. So there you go, right? I mean, non-oil trade is below potential, whether you look at it at the regional or extra-regional, global. Lack of diversification, not only just in limited number of products and limited intra-industry trade, but also in terms of limited partner countries, the non-oil trade, right? And of course, very low participation in global value chains, which is really detrimental nowadays, because this is how the current trend in world trade is running in terms of a structural change as of the last 10, 15 years. What are the factors? I mean, in a nutshell, you can think of the dominant role of the state, and I will have a lot to say about this, and then high barriers to trade, high trade costs, and of course, limited regional integration, and I mean it in terms of the implementation rather than anything else, and you'll see. So, I borrowed here from all the discussions that we've had as of the last 5 years, and when we talked about, the deficit in democracy and the work that Brahim Badawi and Samir Maqdisi led us to actually into the democratic deficits, right? So we talked about, the Arab exceptionalism in that area. And in regional integration, there is an Arab exceptionalism, I submit to you. And it is part and parcel of the storyline that, we have experienced in that particular area. And I've just been talking to Dr. Atif Ubersi, who actually, and I'm going to quote him, politics, my dear friends, economics without politics are fruitless. Politics without economics are without roots, are rootless. And this is basically it. Did I do a bad job quoting you? Well, so, if I did, sorry. So for far too long, the regional integrations in here and in the region have been premised on, common culture, common language, common border, contiguous states, what have you. When in fact, if you were to dig deep, we have different cultures. We are, of course, contiguous and what have you. You talk about, Mashriq, Maghrib, GCC, different, same words in Arabic mean different things in different countries, in different contexts, right? So there is a multicultural environment. It is not a monolithic environment in here, and we just said, this is how where we started from. And what happened is that actually independence has converted the political boundaries into a permanent economic boundaries. And they have been manifested in our day-to-day lives. So we talk today, for even during the Nahda time, right? We talk about economic nationalism. We talk about concerns over distribution of gains, and we'll see how these have manifested themselves, and adjustment costs, despite the fact that leaders, meet regularly, decide, agree, sign, and then we don't go into implementation. So what gives, actually? So I'm going to simplify it and say we have two different visions, and I'm not going to say 60 different visions, two different visions. Just contrast those who actually believe in the multicultural, multi-civilizational aspects of an Arab society, looking for enlightenment, looking for actually modernization, and the others. I'm not going to talk about the others. So these are two extremes. And between them, they actually define completely different visions of who we are and what we seek to achieve and how we seek to achieve it. Of course, the work that has been taking place for the last years, 5 years on the democratic deficit also brings out two very important aspects of this failure on the regional front, which has to do with oil and conflict. And I refer you to at least 2 books that have been published lately on the subject to say, to see to what extent actually these 2 variables, let's call them variables, right, have played into the politics and the economics of the region, and how they prevented, those permanent economic frontiers from being dismantled, right? And then there is that aspect. Where's Mustafa Nabli? He's not here. Fortunately for him, unfortunately for me. There is that aspect. The aspect that the EU is both a promoter and a major player in the region. It promotes regional integration amongst South, they say, and it's a major player in terms of, negotiating bilateral deals. What do you think is the result? What is it? The EU is a hub and the rest are spokes. And then the depth goes one way, and then the shallowness is another. So this is a critical element. You cannot be a promoter and a player at the same time in the same game with the same parties, right? So how do you actually divide your allegiances and your objectives? And this is why, at the end of the day, we end up with, people call it elsewhere spaghetti. If you are in the Maghreb country, you call it couscous bowl. If you are in the Mashreq countries, you're going to call it a tabbouleh bowl. And if you are in the GCC, you'll call it balati. What is that dish in? Balalit. You're going to call it balalit, right? Bowl, right? So wherever you are, and you're telling me about a monolithic culture, it is, couscous, tabbouleh, balalit, right? That's what we end up with, no matter what regional, constellation you have before you. And it's all boils down to one thing, which is the bottom line, the politics of policy. Any policy decision at whatever level has the politics right there, omnipresent, defining the limits of what you can agree with, and the limits of what you will implement eventually, irrespective of what you agreed on. We all know that, there is a system of patronage and control that actually defines the rents and the monopolies and all these aspects. And you ask the leader to come forward and, join another leader and say, let's play ball, man. Ain't gonna happen. Didn't happen. And for good reasons. And of course, there are no major, stakeholders within the region or within any one country or any one industry that will go and fight this, because they're not fighting the business interests, they're fighting the politics of the policy rather than the policy itself, right? And that actually is detrimental, right? So it is a system of privileges. And then you ask the person who created those privileges to dismantle them. That's not going to happen. That didn't happen, and it's not going to happen. And now, you come to the punchline, which is, if we are going for new politics, we need new economics. The premise is, and I'm sure the majority would agree with me, that Arab economies or Arab countries face as much political repression as economic repression. No wonder that you see the role of the private sector as weak, and the state is the hegemon in any one national economy. So we submit to you This is what we wrote, all of us collectively, and what we actually concluded in the latest book that Brahim and Samir edited. You need a new economic order to capitalize on whatever political gains we may get at the end of the line here. And I must submit to you, and I'm looking at Shanta, so, it's nothing personal here, seriously, nothing personal. The role of the IFIs, they are apolitical. They, come in with it, garden variety, standard recipes that we all know. And because they are apolitical, they are by definition narrow and do not respond to the number one issues that have, plagued this region, including when it comes to regional integration. So two things that we need to think about. First, the private sector to the rescue. We need, a rejuvenated private sector to play its role. We need it to be strong. And of course, that has to, be a face against the politics. And we hope that the politics have moved by then, so that the economics can catch up, and the private sector on the shoulders of the private sector. And regional cooperation, and I mean it cooperation, not integration at this stage, at this time of my presentation, is needed, because you're going to enlarge the markets, you're going to give a better chance for your private sector, to gain more sales, more market presence, and across borders, within the borders, and what have you. So, and I was reminded. Back in 1970, reminded of a story, 1971, I read about it. I wasn't born then, but 71, come on, right? So Bourguiba was in his own palace, I'm told, watching TV when Muammar Gaddafi was in Tunisia, giving a lecture in one event. This is where Muammar Gaddafi said, I am here to call for regional integration, between Libya and Tunisia. This is when, I'm told also, Bourguiba actually, calls for his car, runs to the meeting. His prime minister tries to intercept him. He said, step aside. He goes up to the podium and he says, listen, Mr. Gaddafi, first, clean up your act within your country and then come talk to me about regional integration. And this is exactly what we're talking about. So charity begins at home. Let's first work it out internally, and then use regional cooperation. And I'll tell you how, or I'll share with you some of my thoughts in this area. So it is actually for us, at the end of the day, however you look at it, is a political problem. It is, in essence, all what you see today in terms of the failures at the regional level, at the country level, at the weakness of the private sector has its roots in a political deficit that we all hope, individually and collectively, to be behind us as we move beyond the Arab Springs and try to capitalize on some of the movements here. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that, all right, if we believe in all those numbers and all those failures at the regional integration, why do we do it over and over and over again and expect different results at the end of the day? That's exactly, Einstein's definition of insanity. So we're not insane here, right? So let's abandon this dream, this hope, this, we all love this, Arab thingy and all that, but it hasn't worked, so let's start something new. If you keep on doing same thing over and over again, do not expect different results, even if the politics were to change. So that thing has, the bottoms-up approach may consist of three main pillars. First, you think about the policies. And Catherine Mann talked about the trade facilitation, for example. Irrespective of what happened at the regional level, every country in the region that is member of the WTO actually signed off on the trade facilitation, and without them noticing, they converged. Now, how do you capitalize on that convergence within the trade facilitation, right? And within the Arab region, there were leaders in the negotiations, and of course at the end of the day in terms of the implementation. And things are moving on now. So think about another sector where you move forward in terms of reforms, and you show the benefits, and then you create this positive externality that, hey, if they did it, we can do it, right? So all these reforms have the demonstration effect, and you don't need to contend with all the sovereignty issues and all these rent seeking. Eventually, a private sector, a rejuvenated one, when left, when it has a bit of freedom away from the politics, right, will be able to drive through. So I don't know. Choose any policy area that does not touch national sovereignty, that has potentially high payoffs, right? And where the adjustment costs are either low or can be identified and then compensated for at the national level. No need to go, cross border and cross whatever region. And so if you look at the policy area, then trade facilitation is one. Financial services you can think of as another area where you actually create a model of reform of an institution, that showcases the potential benefits, and then that creates that positive externalities that go beyond the borders, right? Then you have projects. You all know that there is the now rail project that is being implemented. When the idea first started, everyone jumped and said, oh, let's create a GCC rail authority. Good idea. Then negotiations started, who's going to do what, and standards and rules of the game and whatever, and nothing happened. Nothing. So GCC Rail Authority. That authority never then materialized. And then leaders said, okay, each one will build their own rail within their own countries according to these specifications, and then eventually we'll link up. Finish. Let's not discuss all the nuts and bolts and create a supranational body, that will actually add rather than subtract, from the efficiencies and moving forward, right? So this is what is taking place. So de facto, why do you need it? The jury, and you want to create a body of laws and regulations and stuff, so that I know for the future, and to be able that this connectivity remains so under solid legal structure and stuff. But the fact of the matter, this has in the first place prevented it from being ever realized, and you only had to scrap that authority at the regional level before you could move forward and implement the project, right? So this I spoke to, and then the dialogues. Let's take a look at our famous chambers of commerce and industry that actually in principle cater for all commerce and all industries within any one country, rather than try to promote any one industry or any one commerce, cross-border. And that needs to change. Those policy dialogues need to change. And of course, they are run in principle by businesses. Let them do what they need to do. We don't need a joint friendship committees, I don't know what, at the political level. Fine, they can do whatever they want, but the action takes place at the grassroots, at the level of those agencies. And then professional agencies whose number one job is not to lobby, local governments, but actually to try and link up with other parties across the border. And then there is this building trust. How do you build it? So suppose you scrap tariff down to zero, and then you do all the mutual recognition agreements and all the standards, and all these things are fine and dandy. And then all of a sudden you get a phone call that, your truck is actually standing at the border, it has perishable goods, and the customs official refuses to let it pass. So sounds familiar? It happens every day. And what do you do about it? There's nothing. I mean, there were kings, princes, sheikhs, presidents who signed on to say, no more of this. It happens every day. So what do? There's a lack of trust. Try what the European Union did. Exchange some staff. So we're going to think about it. I mean, go think outside the box. Send staff from the UAE to work, let's say, at the customs in Saudi Arabia. Send staff from Syria to work in Morocco or Algeria, right? So that they will see for themselves that actually the standards don't differ. They do exactly what they were supposed to do and what the leadership has agreed on. And it may take 3, 4, 5 years, but build it, start it. I mean, if we started this thing, 5, 10 years ago, maybe, just maybe, ladies and gentlemen, we could have done our transition into a democratic system without having to go through all this trouble and stuff. Thank you very much.